Hey everybody, Travis here at Silka. Today is going to be part 2 of my conversation with Dylan Johnson in the Road to Emporia series. Previously we talked about training and kind of my training plan and how we're going to get there. So if you missed that video, we'll link to it in the description. But here we're going to talk about tech. We go into tires. Half of you will turn it off when we talk about aero bars. So take a look at our discussion on gravel tech and what we might be running in June.
Being at Silka, I have a pretty awesome resource when I turn around at my desk and ask some crazy question that I came up with in my head and get some awesome answers. But one thing that I'm always excited to talk about is tech. Whether it's a new bike, a new tire, a new sealant, whatever it is. So I kind of wanted to just roll through. I know you had a pretty optimized setup at Unbound this year. So few different main topics, what kind of things I should be looking out for. I'm actually going to build a new bike for this project. So be able to use marginal gains in all sorts of different ways. So
sure.
I think kind of as an overview, is there something I should look at, and then we can kind of jump into components?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, marginal gains can add up to be quite important at Unbound because we're talking about covering such a large distance, right? And over such a long period of time. I mean, something that would save you 5 minutes over the course of an hour-long ride, multiply that by, 12 hours, right? It becomes very significant. So yeah, I mean, I think that the big three are aerodynamics, drivetrain efficiency, and rolling resistance. I mean, stuff that you guys have talked about on the Marginal Gains podcast time and time again, but all three of those are super important for Unbound. I guess you could throw weight in there, but honestly, Unbound is not a super. I mean, it's rolling hills. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of climbing. Like, you're gonna be like, wow, I'm sick of these rolling hills. But by the time you get to mile 200, but it's not a climbing race. And I don't want to say weight doesn't matter, but out of the 4 marginal gains that I just came up with off the top of my head here, aero, drivetrain efficiency, rolling resistance, and weight is probably the least important one for Unbound.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I would agree for sure. I think one of the big topics, it doesn't really matter where you are, who you're talking to, and if you're putzing around at the expo with all of us, that's where we were last year, and you heard tires all day, every day. Tires and tire pressure.
Yep.
So last year was muddy. I think that can play a big factor. But what do we need to think about with tires? Is there a couple different options? Is there one go-to tire?
Sure. So the big thing with the tires is trying to minimize getting a flat. So you can't go with some super lightweight tire that has super fat, it's super low rolling resistance, unfortunately, at Unbound, because you're going to get a flat tire, and it doesn't matter how fast that tire is on a drum when you're off to the side of the road fixing multiple flat tires. That's not fast.
Yeah.
So it kind of becomes a trade-off of what is a fast tire that also has good puncture protection. And those two do not go hand in hand, right? Like, the thicker the tire, generally, the slower it is. So this is a very fine balancing act trying to find that tire. I've stressed a lot about this. The tire that I can talk a little bit about my personal setup for Unbound, and I ended up not getting a flat tire, and I think actually a lot of that has to do with the fact that I ran the Silka sealant. I did hear air coming out of my tire on 2 separate occasions, but I didn't even have to stop to put the CO2 to the tire because one rotation and they were sealed.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, you're going to have the silica sealant, fortunately, which I think is a huge advantage for you. But as far as the tires go, like I ran the Specialized Pathfinder Pro in the 42 millimeter width. I think that's a great all around tire. You're definitely gonna want to go with the wider width. As far as tire width goes, it's a balancing act between rolling resistance and aerodynamics. And what I mean by that is I've actually tested myself on gravel different width tires, and I mean, honestly, going up to a 2.2 mountain bike tire, you're almost losing nothing if anything, and actually sometimes a mountain bike tire is faster on gravel, up to a 2.2, which sometimes people don't believe that. They're like, oh, dude, that mountain bike tires are slow. If it's rough gravel, which Unbound is rough gravel, you would be surprised by how wide you can go before you actually start slowing down. In fact, I haven't found the point at which you start slowing down with tire width.
It is hard to fathom how accurate that is.
Mm-hmm. Here's the balancing act, though, with the tire width, is that the wider the tire, the less aerodynamic it is. So when I say it's a trade-off between aerodynamics and rolling resistance, it's like a wider tire, you probably have a lower chance of puncturing, and it could very likely have a lower rolling resistance, but you're compromising aerodynamics, both because the tire's physically taking up more area, but also depending on what rim you have, there's a certain point at which the aerodynamics of the rim completely doesn't matter anymore because the tire is ballooning out so much from the rim. And honestly, that's the case with most gravel tires, even at the kind of, narrower widths. But so I found 42 millimeters to be pretty good. Honestly, if Specialized made the Pathfinder Pro in a 45, I'd probably run the 45 at Unbound, which I know is wider than most people go. But I think most people run too narrow a tire for most courses. I almost always have a wider tire than what most people are running. So,
yeah.
And then the other thing I would say about that is get your tire plugging skills dialed and know how to plug a tire in 30 seconds. That's a skill to have for Unbound. And if we're talking about pressure, I mean, you guys have the Silka tire pressure calculator. I have, like I said, I've actually tested different width tires on gravel. And when I do this, I test them at different pressures. And it is shocking how spot on the Silka tire pressure calculator is with what is the fastest pressure, is what I found. Like usually I'll go up, I'll start at the Silka's recommended tire pressure because I'm like, that's the baseline. And then I'll go up and I'll go down a little bit. And sometimes sometimes I'll find like, okay, maybe the optimal tire pressure is just slightly lower than what they say, but it's never far off. And generally people are running too high a pressure. Like for example, at Unbound this year with the 42 Specialized Pathfinder Pros, I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that I was running under 30 PSI. I think I had 29 PSI in the rear and 28 PSI in the front, at 150 pounds, body weight. So yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of advantages at your disposal. You've got the Silka sealant, you've got the Silka tire pressure calculator. I would utilize both of those and try to find a tire that is, as far as the width goes, a compromise between aerodynamics and rolling resistance, and then as far as puncture resistance goes, a good compromise between puncture resistant and not dog slow.
So what about mud? How does that? I did get a chance to ride some of the course last year on a 42 Specialized Pathfinder, and it was awesome. But I rode, I think, what was it, on Thursday when it was bone dry, at least the part of the course I rode. How does the mud play a factor? Is that something that I should worry about?
Yeah, so the mud can change depending on when it rains. So if it's physically raining during the race, I would say it's not even really that big a deal. It's gonna affect things because it's harder to draft because the spray in your face is awful.
Yeah.
But as far as actually riding through the mud while it's physically raining, it really wasn't that difficult. And honestly, like I heard some people talking about bike handling skills. I'm just going to be honest. Unbound has so few, there's a lot of corners because it's a long race, but it's not a race where you need superb cornering ability. Like, you're going straight and then you make a 90-degree right, and then you go straight and you make a 90-degree left, and then you go, you're just going straight and making 90-degree corners every 10 miles, right? Or 5 miles.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really that big a deal where you need, like, cyclocross handling skills for this race. If it rains and then it stops, that can actually be quite dangerous because the mud can sort of get thick and peanut buttery, and some sections have a lot of clay in them, so they'll just like cake on your bike, and your bike will go from being 20 pounds to 45 pounds with all the mud on it, and your wheels are hardly spinning, and your drivetrain sounds like, it sounds terrible, and so that can be quite dangerous if like it rains the night before. That's probably the worst conditions you could ask for. So I would probably keep that in mind. I will say though that most of the time it's a fairly dry race. I would say probably on average probably every 5 years you get a mud race.
Okay. So if that happens the night before, I know we had another athlete that we were working with that decided he was going to run 33s.
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends. So cutting through the mud, I mean, I've heard different opinions on this. I mean, cyclocross racers will say, yeah, you want the narrow tires because they cut through the mud. I've heard people say that, no, you want the fatter tires so you can roll over the mud. I mean, there are different opinions on this, and it probably depends on the type of mud, right? I think that where the 33s come in is that it's probably better for frame clearance. Like, if you have a frame that doesn't have a lot of clearance, then your tires are going to be gunking up your frame, and your wheel can't physically spin, right? Which is a huge problem.
That is not going to be fast.
Yeah, personally, I wasn't having issues with that this past year, but it was physically raining during the race, and I had 42 millimeter tires. If it was raining, it depends on the frame that you have and how much clearance you have, but I wouldn't necessarily go with 33s. I think 33s are also increasing the likelihood that you'll get a flat, which you don't want.
Yeah. The least amount of time spent on the side of the road, the better.
Sure.
So I know we talked wheels a little bit with tires. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the next logical step. Coming from a road background, and obviously a lot of road talk around here. Aero wheels are big. They're fast. They go. They help you. But when you put a 45 mil tire on, you cut a lot of those aero benefits out. It doesn't. You can't really run the rule 105 or anything like that. So, what do you look for? What do you look for in a wheel?
Yeah, I mean, so preferably you'd want if you're trying to get any sort of aero benefit out of your wheel, it's got to be a fairly wide wheel. And honestly, different manufacturers have different claims about this, like whether or not there's any aero benefit to be had when you throw a 42 millimeter tire on a wheel. Some say there's literally no aero benefit. Some say that you may be getting a little bit of aero benefit, but it's certainly not nearly as much as with a 28 mil tire, right? So I would say that both from an aerodynamic perspective and just from a bike handling perspective and kind of setting your tire at a wider width, you want to go with wider rims. So I would look for something that's like 25 millimeter internal rim width or even wider than that. I think that'll be helpful. Obviously, you're going to want to go tubeless, so something that works well with tubeless. Some rims work better with tubeless than others. I would also go with tire inserts, and I've heard Josh talk about different types of tire inserts that do and don't affect your tire rolling resistance. Particularly the ones that touch the sidewalls probably affect tire rolling resistance, and the ones that do not touch sidewalls probably have little effect on rolling resistance. But I think that just if you're planning to run low tire pressure, which you should to optimize tire rolling resistance, there's going to be points in the day where if you don't have a tire insert, you're going to be hitting rim. You're just going to smash a pothole while you're in the group or something. So I think that's very helpful, and it adds like minimal amounts of weight to your bike.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this might be the point where we have half the people turn the video off. Aero bars or no aero bars?
Yeah, the controversial aero bar discussion. So at most gravel races, even if they allow aero bars, you'll see very few people on aero bars. Personally, if aero bars are allowed and they are an advantage on that particular course, they are on my bike, and I don't care what other people say about it. I'm doing a bike race to get to the finish line as fast as I can. I'm not in some sort of like beauty competition or like like high school prom or something. I'm not going to let people peer pressure me out of running the fastest setup. So I am 100% on the aero bar train, and what you'll find when you go to Unbound is that there are a lot more people embracing aero bars than at your typical gravel race. It's probably like 50% of people are on aero bars, and 50% of people aren't on aero bars. Yeah. So, I mean, I've done some calculations on this. Let's say that you obviously can't use aero bars for the entirety of the 200-mile course, not even close. But let's say that you could use let's do a really conservative estimate and say that you could only use aero bars for a fourth of the race, because the other 3/4 of the race you're either drafting or you're on a downhill or you're on a climb and you can't use them. So it's only 1/4 of the race that you can actually use them. That's 50 miles. If you go from the hood's position to the aero bar position, according to Bike Calculator, which, let's keep in mind that people have different body shapes and different aero positions. So this is, depends on the rider, but we're talking about a 25-minute savings. By using aero bars.
That's as much as the different course.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's huge, and it's such a no-brainer. It just I don't know, this whole aero bar people know aero bars are faster, but it's just kind of like, I don't know, people pontificating about the spirit of gravel and like I don't know. I am a diehard marginal gainer, and honestly, aero bars are not even a marginal gain at Unbound. They're just a gain, just a straight up gain. So, I'm gonna leave whether or not you want to run aero bars up to you. But if it were me, I would 100% have aero bars on my bike. And I want to make this caveat: don't be one of these people that just throws aero bars on like a day before the race, because I see plenty of people doing that. And then not only are they not used to the aero bars, so they can't maximize their benefit, but like they don't know how to ride with aero bars. And, it's clear. And like, if you're going to use aero bars, train with them on gravel, see how they feel on gravel, and don't just throw them on the day before the race. And also, like, use aero bars when you're either on the front or riding solo. Don't be using aero bars like when you're drafting closely in the pack and you got you're on gravel and you have potholes coming.
Yeah, I'm not out there to make any enemies, so I think if I go the aero bar route, it'll be because I think I'm going to be spending an awful lot of time by myself. So,
sure, and most people do. Most people do end up spending time by themselves in this race. It's just the nature of the race.
So yeah, we'll table the aero bar debate for maybe later down the road. But I think a big one in gravel that the options are just kind of limitless right now is on bike storage, nutrition, mechanical. You mentioned tire plugging. Where do you keep them? Where do you put your water? Do you bring a pack? Do you like I said, the options are just kind of limitless. Frame bag, top tube.
Sure. Yeah, I think another big discussion is the hydration pack versus no hydration pack. Obviously, most people are opting for a hydration pack, even the pros, just because there's so much time between these aid stations. I mean, the last two iterations of the race, they've only had 2 aid stations in 200 miles. And they've had one neutral water stop in the middle, so I guess you could say that's 3. But that's a lot of time between aid stations, and that's a lot of liquid that you have to carry and nutrition that you have to carry. So personally, I think the first time I did Unbound, I did use a hydration pack, but the last 2 times I did not use a hydration pack, and here's my thinking on it. The hydration pack is weight on your back, which is fatiguing. It also is a little bit hotter. Anybody who's ridden with a hydration pack on a hot day can feel like the heat of the sweat trapped on your back. And dealing with the heat is important. And I would venture to guess that it's less aerodynamic. I could be wrong about that, because I haven't seen anybody wind tunnel test a pack versus no pack, and that's something I'd be super curious to see. But I would.
Here's an idea. How about a pack on the chest?
I think I've heard Josh say that's actually more aerodynamic. A pack on the chest.
Yeah, they actually banned it. I might be wrong here, but I think it was Bobby Julich that was doing it in time trials for a while, and the UCI came in and banned it. So. Really.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Do you think? A pack on the chest. I don't know. That might be so uncomfortable for 200 miles. What do you think? Do you think a pack on the back is more or less aerodynamic? I mean, we're completely speculating here, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my hiking backpack that's huge and bulky and has a lot of flaps. That's going to be a lot less. The other option that I've thought about is running
some very lightweight race packs that, like, they don't have anything flapping from them, and they're super lightweight. So,
yeah, I mean, so the other option is down tube, I guess, and we can talk about that too. Obviously, if you didn't run a hydration pack this year, you figured out how to get that much nutrition in.
Yeah. So my bike has 2 bottle cages in the frame, like most, and then it has a bottle cage under the down tube, which is a kind of dangerous spot, I'm going to be honest, because A, you could lose the bottle quite easily, and B, I don't know, if you're kicking up, cow manure or whatever, it's actually like a physically dangerous spot for you. I'll be honest, I don't know if I actually ever drank out of that bottle, but I had a bottle in my back pocket. So I had 4 bottles total on the bike. And it was so cool during the race, temperature-wise, that I don't think that I ever touched the down tube bottle. I think I made it, and this is not going to be the case if it's a hot year. I think I made it between every aid stop with just 3 bottles, like the bottle in my back pocket and the 2 bottles inside my frame. That obviously gets a lot more tricky if it's a hot year, and when it's hot, what you got to realize is that A, it's getting hotter throughout the day, and B, you're getting more dehydrated throughout the day. So the amount of liquid that you need exponentially increases throughout the race, if that makes sense. Like, you don't need that much liquid for the first leg. You could easily need twice as much liquid for the last leg as you do for the first leg. Depending on the length of the legs. But yeah. Like, you're going to need that much more water because it's that much hotter and you're that much more dehydrated. So I don't,
what's your
I don't know.
Thought on frame packs?
Yeah, I've seen some really innovative frame pack ideas, and that's actually a route that I wanted to go down. I just don't think it was necessary this year, but it's definitely a route that I've wanted to explore, like putting a bladder in a frame bag instead of having it on your back, or having bottles in a frame bag. In fact, actually in 2019, 2020. I don't know. In 2020, it was canceled. I can't remember. 2021. Yeah. I actually had a frame bag. I actually had a frame bag. I didn't have it this year. I had a frame bag with 2 bottles in the frame bag. So I had 2 bottles in my frame bag and 2 bottles inside my triangle. So I had 4 bottles total. That was a hot year, and actually 4 bottles was not nearly enough liquid. I was totally running out of water. So you'd probably need as far as how much liquid you're going to need between these aid stations on a hot year, I would say towards the end of the race, we're talking about like 5 to 6 bottles worth.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of the bottle, and probably depending on other factors too, like how heavy a sweater you are, but it's a lot of liquid.
Yeah. No, I think, I actually have both setups already. So maybe we'll do some testing and figure out which one's faster. Yeah. But I have a frame bag. I have actually have two hydration bladders.
Awesome.
So maybe we'll take those out and see which one. Yeah. See which one's
faster. I would love to see that setup. Like I said, it's definitely something that I've thought about doing as well. So
cool. Well, maybe that'll be another video in the series.
Yeah.
What about mechanical storage? How do you plugs, things like that? How many inner tubes? I actually talked to one of the shops in the area that I want to say they sold 1,500 CO2 canisters that week or something. So something.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
People coming in buying 10 CO2 canisters. What was your flat plan?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've gotten really good at plugging a tire with a tire plug and then hitting it with a CO2 pretty quickly. And I think that is an important skill to have. And the tire plugs that I use are Dyna plugs. In my personal opinion, I think that they work the best out of any plugs on the market. So I would probably go with a Dyna plug, and I would go with the one that has like 4 different plugs in it, so you can use it 4 times, and maybe carry 2 of those. Which I don't normally carry 2 of those, but for Unbound, you might want 2 of those, and then. I mean, I'd probably maybe carry 3 or 4 20-gram CO2s just to be on the safe side. And I would carry like 1 tube with you. Honestly, so this is gonna shock people right now. I didn't even carry a tube this year. And I'm gonna explain why. If you have to put a tube in your bike, by the way, I don't recommend that you don't carry a tube for Unbound. You should carry a tube at Unbound. This is just my crazy thinking right now, and me being a little bit more of a marginal gains guy. But if I have to put a tube in, my race is over, and it's partially because I have to spend quite a bit of time physically putting the tube in. But at a race like Unbound, you are asking to get another flat if you have to put a tube in. putting a tube in should be your absolute last resort. You should try to plug it with tire plugs until you physically can't do it. And at the point where you're like, okay, there's no saving this, I have to put a tube in, then you got to do what you got to do. But that should be your last resort, putting a tube in, because chances are you will get another flat if you put a tube in.
Yeah. Okay. No tube. Couple CO2s.
No, you should use a tube, because especially with your strategy, right? Like you're just you're trying to finish at all costs, right? If you're the finish at all costs guy, carry a tube, right? For if you're like, if I wanna win this race or die trying, win or nothing, which I'm not even the win or nothing guy. I'm just trying to get like a relatively high placing amongst the pros. Maybe go for the no tube strategy, but I don't know. Yeah. I'm very hesitant to recommend that. I'm just saying that's what I did.
Yeah, I won't bring no tubes, but okay. So anything on the spares or other kind of gear that, how do we optimize this for comfort or just getting there, right? I think the idea of marginal gains is always at the pointy end. Sure. Maybe it's for Ivar and Keegan and those guys or you, but I can use it a lot too to instead of 15 hours get 14 hours and I beat the sun. Sure. So what other topics are there that I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like the storage for your tools, I just put them in my back pocket. I think that's probably the most aerodynamic placement for them. If you have you'd probably want to consult Josh on this. I don't know if he's tested this or not, but I feel like having a saddlebag is less aerodynamic. I'm kind of saying that off, I don't necessarily have data to back that up. Yeah. And then certainly putting it, I don't know, putting it somewhere on your bike where it's could potentially be, interfering with the wind is obviously less aerodynamic. I think, generally from the data I've seen on where you can place your bottle around your frame, the most aerodynamic position for your bottle is actually in your back pocket, which is what leads me to believe that putting your tools in your back pocket is the most aerodynamic position.
Yeah.
So okay. I'd probably do that. I mean, as far as aerodynamics goes, like I do aero helmet. If it's a super hot year, I would consider doing a vented helmet just because dealing with the heat is so important. But for this year, it was obvious aero helmet. Like it wasn't that hot. Aero helmet. I do skin suit. I actually have a TT skin suit. I work with Starlight Apparel, and I run their TT skin suit, which has a zipper in the back instead of a zipper in the front. It's very excessive, but I the clothing matters a lot, and I would definitely optimize for that. I would probably go with the Aero socks, like the Silka Aero socks, or it's probably what I would run. Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about drivetrain efficiency, but I mean, with the Silka hot melt wax, seems like you got that covered. Like you're gonna have the fastest drivetrain that you can have. And we can talk a little bit about what, you probably know more about this than I do, what you should do about, like, should you relube mid-race? Because like it's almost like no matter what you do, your drivetrain is going to be making noise at mile 190. No, we can definitely jump into that. I think we got that question. I had to have answered it 200 times in the booth at at the expo. Sure.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were on a wax chain also.
Yep.
and I actually waxed chains for a few other riders too. And there's a few companies that have these little bottles of wax, emulsified wax, like our Super Secret, that they sell and as a top-up lube. If that does anything, it's going to make your problems worse. So the emulsifying agents in there are there to take that wax into the drivetrain. If you don't let those dry, they will likely just take out any wax that's in the drivetrain that's still in the chain, will likely force that out of the chain. So now your squeaky drivetrain, or your might be grinding from the mud. I mean, this year was I think Adam Roberge posted a photo of his bike after the race, and I actually was in his one of his sags and saw it, and it was gross. Actually, we hit it with a pressure washer, and there is no lubricant that's going to be able to do 200 miles of that. That doesn't exist. And if somebody tells you otherwise, I would steer clear. The drip wax is only going to make it worse. At that point, oil is the way to go. So there is really just about no condition that I would probably start that race with oil, because it's just going to pick up. It's going to pick up more and more dirt, more and more dust, more and more mud, whatever it might be. But when you get to mile 90 and it's coated in mud, you're kind of at a 90-mile, 100-mile cyclocross race at that point. Everything's caked on, and you're just grinding a paste into the wax. You're going to need to wipe that chain off and add more lubricant, and Synergetic is pretty easily going to be the way to go. To my knowledge, there's nothing yet that can compete with Synergetic on an oil, in that oil category. So, wax chain to start, Synergetic as a top up. That means you're going to have to go back and totally degrease that chain and, kind of go through the whole cleaning process again when you get home. But, like I told people, you came out and did a 200-mile race, so a little bit of bike cleaning afterwards.
I mean, you're probably going to have to do that anyway after that race.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I think that I just threw my chain away after Unbound this year.
Yeah. If there was a race to do it, it probably would have been that one.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even that old a chain. Like, I mean, it maybe still had life in it, but I was just like, I'm never gonna use this. I could have maybe used it as a training chain, but I was like, I'm never gonna race this chain again. It's been through the ringer. That's just me though. If you don't want to constantly replace your chain like I do, then you don't necessarily have to do that. But
yeah. No, I think on the drivetrain side of things, really we haven't seen a chain test faster than the Dura-Ace road chains. Yeah. So it'll probably be, I don't know the whole setup yet, so it'll probably be somewhere in there. And then I will, the fastest way to do it would be to wax it, go for a short ride, kind of break that in. And then honestly, what I'll probably do is, as some of that flakes off the night before, add Super Secret on top to fill in any replacement. Is that the fastest on the start line? No, probably not. But I don't really care about that because 200 miles, I need as much lubricant there as possible. So
sure, yeah. No, I go with on my gravel bike. I've got Shimano drivetrain, Dura-Ace chain, 2x drivetrain instead of 1x. I think 2x is a better drivetrain solution for Unbound, in my personal opinion, just because there's going to be long sections of the course where you're just riding at the same speed and gradient for a long period of time, and if you get into those 1x setups, a lot of times you can't find the right gear. Like, oh, this gear is too hard, this gear is too easy. You get smaller jumps with the 2x smaller cassette, and also, I mean, this is something Josh has talked about. There's some data to suggest that 2x drivetrains are actually more efficient than 1x drivetrains. So,
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's huge. When Shimano launched one of their maybe the new 12-speed Dura-Ace, they came on and they actually came on the Marginal Gains podcast and were talking about the kind of the difference, because I think Josh has hit on it a number of times. Off the top of my head, I think when you're in the difference between an 11 and a 10 tooth cog is 6 watts or something like that.
Yeah.
On a road, a clean drivetrain, all that kind of stuff. 250 watts, but like that's not a small gain. I mean, that's
sure. Yeah.
That's real. So yeah, the bigger chain rings, the bigger. I mean, we just saw Filippo Ganna break the hour record on a 66 tooth chain ring, and that's definitely part of it. So I'm a huge 2x proponent.
Yeah,
I wish we saw more of that.
Yeah, as far as the gearing, because gearing can be big for gravel racing too. Like, what gearing do you run? It's going to depend on how fast you're going, because obviously the faster you're going, the bigger gears you need. Personally, yeah. I ran a 52 tooth chain ring and a 36 tooth small ring, and then I had a 11 to 32 cassette, I believe. Or maybe it was 11 to 34. I can't remember if it was 11 to 32 or 11 to 34. But I would probably say that somebody shooting for a 12 to 14 hour finish, maybe it'd be a little bit safer to go for like a 50 tooth chain ring and a 34 tooth small ring. There's nothing crazy steep on the course. It's just like when you get to the end of the race, it's nice to be able to have a little bit lower gear. If you can't, you want to stay in the optimal cadence if you're slogging along at the end of the race, as opposed to grinding. So,
yeah, I've actually had any longer ride I've done lately, and I think mostly probably because of the lack of training, but I've had a big problem with cramping, so just slogging out a low gear or a big gear at 50 RPM is probably not going to help that cause at all.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. Yeah.
I think what I'm hoping to run right now, I'm going to do a little bit more digging on the drivetrain side, is a 4831 crank, the GRX, and then maybe even an 1140 cassette, and really have just kind of a ridiculous bailout gear.
I think that's smart.
I don't think they'll ever need that, but I don't think I'll ever need a 4811 either. So try to stay in the middle of the cassette as much as I can and have a bailout option.
Yeah. I think that's smart. Cool. Let's talk about cramping. So I've done research on cramping. I've done a video on cramping, and a lot of people have this assumption that cramping is due to not taking in enough electrolytes. And the research on cramping seems to suggest that is not the case. That is not the reason for your cramps. At least it's not the reason for most people's cramps. Getting cramps in the first place is highly genetic. There's some people that just have, unfortunately, they're natural crampers, and there's some people that fortunately are not natural crampers. The answer, so when somebody's really struggling with cramping and they're like, why am I struggling with cramping? Is there a quick fix that I can do? The unfortunate answer that they don't want to hear is that it has to do with your fitness level. The fitter you are, the less likely you are to cramp. And that's just kind of what the research is suggesting at this point. Cramping is sort of your body telling you, like, what are you doing? Stop doing this.
Yeah.
Because you've been working too hard. But if your body gets to a point where it's used to that workload, it's like, okay, we can handle this workload. Personally, I don't cramp very often, but if I do cramp, it's usually at like the first race of the season or the second race of the season, right? I'm not used to a race effort yet. And my body is like, what are you doing? We haven't done this in 6 months. Like, why are you going so hard for so long? But generally after that, I don't have issues with cramping. So, like I said, that's not the answer that crampers want to hear. Yeah. But it is kind of like the reality of it is getting over your cramps is going to have more to do with the training that we do and how fit we can get you than I don't know, having some sort of like quick electrolyte solution. That being said, if you do experience cramps during the race, obviously, you can't go back in time and do more training and fix it. Like, what do you do during the race when you experience cramps? A lot of people have found that if you just push through it, the cramps will actually go away, which is counterintuitive. Like, what you feel like you need to do is just stop and sit on the side of the road until they go away. But a lot of I won't say it works for everybody, but a lot of people have found that if you just push through it, they go away. And also what you can do is you can stretch the cramping muscles. Stretching seems to relieve cramping in the moment. So if you get a quick quad cramp, maybe unclip, try to stretch out that quad on a downhill, see if that relieves the cramping, and then keep going.
Okay. Yeah, my personal, and I have read, I think I've read the same studies because that's the conclusion I've come to also. But my personal cramping story, if you will, I didn't used to cramp very much, pretty much never did. I've only had a couple events of cramping. I did a 4-hour century that I was totally unprepared for a few years ago, and 8 miles from the finish, just leg seizing cramps. And then basically any long ride I've done lately. So it's all hamstrings and like inner thighs. So the getting off and stretching has been anecdotally the only thing that has helped me. So
yeah,
it's reassuring and disappointing at the same time to hear the answer.
Sure. Yeah. I think we could also touch on pacing really quick, because pacing is such an important thing for this race, and it's something that like 99% of people will screw up. So theoretically, the best way to pace an endurance event is to either do even pacing or negative splits. Negative splits is probably close to impossible at Unbound. I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible. You could ride around at zone 1 for the first half and then do a negative split. But in practice, no one's negative splitting. But you could get closer to doing an even pacing strategy. And what I mean by an even... So for those who don't know what negative splitting or even pacing is, negative splitting is where you go faster in the second half than you do in the first half. Like I said, probably close to impossible for Unbound. For most people. Even pacing is where you go just as fast in the second half as you do in the first half. It's even pacing. What most people do is they go out way too hard, and then I have looked at countless power files from endurance races at this point to know this. It's like a universal law that you go out too hard and your power just drops and drops and drops and drops throughout the race. Like, your power is just going down throughout the race, which is not optimal pacing. And I kind of tried to optimize this year, and it's hard to do this because this is not a time trial. This is a race where you can draft, and drafting is highly advantageous. So the typical strategy that people do is they just, if they're strong enough to stay with the pros, they'll just try to stay with them as long as they can until they blow, and then they're on their own. And I actually tried to do a different strategy where I tried to evenly pace, and I recruited some riders to help me do it for the first half, and then I caught some strong riders to help work in the second half, and I think it worked okay. obviously I can't go back in time and try doing the normal strategy to see if that would have worked better.
Yeah.
So, but it's a balance, right? Because here's what it's a balance of. It's a balance of getting in a sufficiently fast group that works well together. That's a large size that will help you, go quite a bit faster over the course of the race and not going too hard. And the reality is that in order to get into that group, whether that's like the second group on the road or the fifth group on the road, whatever group it is, the reality is that in order to get into that group, you probably are going to have to go harder than what is optimal pacing. And because if you optimally pace, the group that you end up being with is going to be so slow, they're not going to be helpful for you, for whatever goal you have, if it's a 12-hour finish. Like if you optimally pace for the first hour. Right, exactly. Like if you optimally pace for a 12-hour finish, after the first hour, you're going to be with people that are going to be finishing in 18 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the reality of it. It's a fine line. And what I recommend doing is probably paying close attention to your heart rate. You can do it off of power as well, but power is obviously bouncing around all the time and it's a little bit harder to do. But heart rate is kind of giving you a snapshot of what you've been doing for the last 5 minutes, right? And I would be very cautious about letting your heart rate ever reach like threshold heart rate. I would probably try to keep it under that. And if you see yourself getting to that point, there's so many people that do Unbound that you could probably just back it off a touch, let yourself get dropped from whatever group you're in, and there's probably going to be a pretty solid group like a minute down the road that you can hook onto.
Yeah.
It's really not worth blowing yourself up to get into a group at Unbound because it will bite you later in the race. I mean, the race is so long that you just can't. I mean, if you ride close to your threshold for the first hour of the race, you're going to be absolutely screwed for the next, 9 to 15 hours, however long it takes you.
Yeah. Yeah, I just did this summer. We have one gravel century called the Dust Bowl here in Indiana, and I did that and did about the exact opposite of that approach. And
most people
I'm
do.
trying to stay with the group. I felt okay. I'm going to try to stay with the group for a little while to get a little bit further quicker, and then I'll drop off. But I just have this nasty habit of pin a number on, and I have a hard time letting go of a wheel until I'm forced to. And that happened in a rather violent way this time. So we're gonna try to go a little bit more even this time, or in June.
Yeah, it's very difficult to do because if you pace a 200-mile race correctly, you should feel like you're going so easy in the first hour, right? That the first hour should, it's like if you actually were to ride at the same power output for the entire race, the first hour would feel like you're practically at zone 1. You're not actually at zone 1, but you're tapered for the race. Your adrenaline is through the roof because it's race day, and it will feel that easy. And then that same power output in the last hour is going to be so hard that you're like can barely hold it. Right?
Yeah. Is there a good intensity factor to try to shoot for? Like what percent of threshold?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be dependent on how fit you are. Like, for example, a rider like Keegan can probably hold, doing an intensity factor of like 0.8 or 0.85 or something crazy like that. Whereas most people are probably shooting for like 0.75 on a good day, or 0.7 if maybe they're less fit than that. So, I mean, yeah, as far as intensity factor goes, you're probably looking at like 0.7 to 0.75, I would say, for most people.
Okay. Yeah, that's at least a good ballpark to kind of keep an eye on during the ride.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we'll definitely pick this up here in the not too distant future. So, but I really appreciate you coming on and talking tech and marginal gains and training and all that. So,
yeah.
But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks a lot for coming
I
on.
love talking about this stuff. So, it's going to be an exciting project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks to Dylan again for joining us. I know it's been a lot of fun talking to him about training, technology, marginal gains, and kind of geeking out over a bike setup. So we'll actually bring Dylan back on here in a couple months and check in with him, see how my training's going, what kind of changes we need to make. Maybe there'll be some new tech out there too that we can touch on and figure out what setup we're going to run in June in Emporia.